The licensing committee meeting was curiously compelling. It was on the subject of taxis, not something I must admit that I know anything about. It turns out that taxi drivers of Colchester are not happy, for many reasons. So many reasons, in fact, they couldn't fit them into a 3-minute speech. There was a wide variety of issues, from people parking in their taxi ranks, and the council is supposed to have enforcement officers that go out and stop this, but they go home at a certain time, and everyone in Colchester apparently seems to know it, so they just park in the taxi ranks. What I wasn't aware of until this meeting was the sheer amount of control that the council have over the taxis and the amount of hoops they get them to jump through in order to be taxi drivers. You think of it as being a fairly simple occupation. Take person from point A to point B, get paid, goodbye. No, well, it should be, but no, there's an awful lot they have to do. Mind-blowing amount, in fact. So there aren't national guidelines for taxi drivers. Each council has to come up with their own policy, which the taxi drivers have to follow in order to get their licences. I must admit, I'm not keen on the licensing committee. It always feels like extortion to me. You want to work in the city? You give us some money. Capiche? But with the taxi industry, I do get you have to make it safe for people. So they do need to do a lot of checks to make sure that they're not mass murderers or rapists. The vehicles have to be checked. The list goes on. Two of the main bones of contention at this meeting were the fact that taxi drivers can only drive vehicles of a certain age, and it's so expensive to buy newer vehicles that they can't actually afford to replace their current vehicle. So a request was put in that they could allow them to drive slightly older vehicles as long as they met the required standards. The council agreed in principle that this was a good idea and that they would have a 6-week consultation to get everyone's opinion, because apparently they can't just do things, they have to consult with everything. So it was really refreshing to see the teamwork that was going in with listening to the problems and trying to come up with solutions. So at the time I didn't have a bad word to say about it, which is good because I don't actually like doing the negative videos. I know some of the things can be quite amusing, and let's face it, when things are so bad you're either going to laugh or cry, you might as well try and laugh. But that aside, I was looking forward to doing an episode where I could really sing the praises of the council. But there was just one slight thing that one of the officers said that just caused a bit of a niggle. And in the end, by Saturday afternoon, it's like, no, I'm going to have to research this. Because it just didn't make sense what the council was saying and what the problem was. There was a big disconnect. So as much as I would love to do 100% positive video about Colchester Council, this isn't going to be that video, unfortunately. But anyway, let's start out with the things they did really well, and then I'll address that niggle that got me to research. They really did listen and were very engaged.
I'm Panther Cabs in Colchester. We've got over 220 cars, so they're the biggest fleet in Colchester and top 3 in Essex. I've been in the taxi trade for over 40 years and I've seen a lot of the changes within the licensing department and the taxi trade. It would take me hours to tell you all the problems in the taxi trade. But the most important issue at this present time, which is why I'm here today, is the Wolver Hampton cars coming to Colchester. Do you know who they are? Do you check if they are DBS checked? Do you have any contact details for them? Do you know if their cars are roadworthy, as my drivers have to pay to have their cars checked and to be driven into Colchester? And most of all, why are they here? As you all know, the Rochdale grooming gang are in the news at the present time. And it makes me think about that case. I would hate to think that something like that was going to be repeated in our city. No matter who they are, no matter where they're from, because there are no checks on these drivers that are driving in Colchester. Plus, all our drivers had to go on a safeguarding course, of which I attended myself. Have these drivers been on that course? So as a business owner, as well as a mother of 2 daughters and a nan, I would like to think that every taxi driver working in Colchester has been checked and verified to work here. You know what I mean? It's dodgy out there. If them drivers ain't checked, why do my drivers have to be checked when other people don't have to?
Obviously, this is new for Colchester to have Wolver Hampton plated vehicles. Other Essex councils have had them before. With regards to the checks on Wolver Hampton drivers, we don't have the power to do them because they're Wolver Hampton drivers. What I will say is I've had conversations directly, as my team have, with Wolver Hampton, and we're not impressed with the answers. However, if it's not illegal, there's very little at this stage we can do.
Yes, Christine, to answer your question, we're probably more worried about it than you are, and you're very worried. I come at this as a lawyer does. I am a lawyer. The law allows it, full stop. We don't have any control in that. We find that this is unacceptable. It is the Wolverhampton effect. There have been other authorities that have done this, not just Wolverhampton, but there are issues in relation to it that need and can only be addressed at a national level. That's why, as the chair said, we're going to put our hands up and actually write to the minister saying this is ridiculous, it needs to be sorted out at a national level. There need to be national safety standards. Secondly, thinking this, all the drivers that are now currently engaging in this process, they don't all come from Wolverhampton, they all come from Colchester. So where are they going to go when this national policy is mandated to get their plates? They're going to come to Colchester. So the message the trade now needs to give out is that if a driver in Colchester is now deliberately choosing to try to transfer to a lesser public safety standard for their own convenience, reward and benefit, then Colchester City Council will need to consider possibly that they might not be a fit and proper person to hold a Colchester licence plate in the future when they have to come back to Colchester City Council to be licensed, as inevitably they will.
So Councillor Buston then went on to recommend that the taxi drivers got together for a class action lawsuit taken against any Colchester drivers who have the Wolverhampton plates. That sounds quite a headache to do. Why not simply go to the newspapers and the media outlets and warn them that there are drivers in Colchester with Wolverhampton plates that don't have the same stringent levels of checks that we do in Colchester? That alone might be enough to put people off hiring them, and therefore the problem takes care of itself. The reason they probably didn't suggest that is because they can't. The Wolverhampton drivers are checked. In fact, in an article, Wolverhampton were boasting about how good their DBS checks are. They were the first in the country, they believed, to get the daily checks done. So are the drivers checked daily in Colchester? But also, there's another area that they could look at, and this is what nobody really went into detail, and I feel they should have done, is to why. Why on earth would anyone go to the hassle of getting plates in Wolverhampton? This is where I feel Colchester Council should put some of their officers' time into looking at, finding out precisely why so many drivers are getting Wolverhampton plates, rather than blaming Wolverhampton Council for making life easier on their taxi drivers. Perhaps Colchester should look at doing the same. Safety, of course, is paramount, but also so is the ease of working for these taxi drivers. It sounds like a complete nightmare. So Colchester Council do need to address this, because if they're not careful, every driver in Colchester will sign up at Wolverhampton and they will lose hundreds of thousands of licensing revenue. As Councillor Buston said, there simply has to be some gain for them to go to all the hassle of having Wolverhampton plates. So it just didn't make sense as to why drivers were going to all the effort of being registered in Wolverhampton yet working out of Colchester, and this is what was causing the niggle. So I thought I would research to find out precisely what the difference is between what Colchester require the drivers to do and what Wolverhampton. So first off, I thought I would compare the fees, and here's what I found. Right, so this article was updated in March 23, and as you can see, the Hackney carriage licence, they'd actually reduced it from £64 down to £49, or the 3-year licence was reduced down to £98, and the private hire drivers was £39 for 1 year and £78 for 3 years. So let's now compare that to Colchester. So the Colchester operator's licence renews once every 5 years, so that brings it down to about £60 a year. So not a million miles off of that. Let's now look at the vehicles itself. So black cab, Hackney carriage, £410 a year, whereas in Wolverhampton it's £95 a year. Private hire vehicles are the same. Now their vehicle inspections, 470, but that's 100 miles from Wolverhampton, and Colchester is 166 miles. So if the taxi drivers don't drive to Wolverhampton, it's going to cost them £818 to be inspected. Next up, I looked at the licensing policy, i.e. all the things that the drivers have to do in order to get their licence. Now Wolverhampton, as you can see here, has 18 pages of all the things they can and can't do. Do you want to hazard a guess at how many pages the Colchester version of this document has? just type a number in the comments below. Do you think it's double, triple? Maybe it's less, maybe it's the same. Well, the actual number of pages in the Colchester document is 144, compared to the 18 Wolver Hampton has managed it in. So as curiosity got the better of me, I was going to go through the Wolver Hampton document compared to the Colchester one, but only by the time I reached page 22 of the Colchester licensing policy document, all that curiosity evaporated. So I've not done it, but somebody in the trade does need to. Chelmsford's managed to do theirs in 61 pages, and Cambridge City Council, 60 pages. So is Cambridge really less safe than Colchester when it comes to taxi drivers? Now, whilst I'm not an expert on taxis, I have been studying Colchester Council for nearly a year now, and I have read an awful lot of their documentation and watched a great number of their meetings. And something that comes across loud and clear is how complicated they manage to make everything. I mean, even Councillor Sunnox in a meeting not that long ago said that he would buy any of the officers that could make any of their policy documents shorter. He'd buy them an ice cream out of his own pocket. And many times in meetings it's mentioned how unbelievably complicated everything is. So during the meeting, the council were very much blaming Wolver Hampton as the problem, and that they'd spoken to them and they weren't going to change how they do things, and how they were going to write to the government and then make sure that it becomes a national policy, and then that would sort out the problem. Well, that will probably take years, but is the problem really Wolver Hampton? Having dug into it, I'm not so sure. I think the problem's a lot closer to home. I think Colchester Council, this is the trade's way of telling you, you have made their lives so complicated beyond belief that they would rather drive to Wolver Hampton once or twice a year to get their vehicles checked than have any dealings with you whatsoever. Yes, Colchester may have more safety and security checks, but Wolver Hampton are doing all the really important ones, from the drivers to the vehicles. So the extra hoops that they're making Colchester drivers jump through, one, are they really necessary? Look at the 80-20 rule. You get 80% of the results doing 20% of the things. And even if the drivers and the council decide that actually, yes, we like the way we've got our system, as in the safety standards we can guarantee people of Colchester, there must be a way to simplify that paperwork. There simply must be. So for what it's worth, my recommendations to Colchester Council would be to lower your fees by at least £100, making it less of an incentive for people to go to Wolver Hampton, and work with the taxi companies to find a way that you can have the safety standards that you feel are necessary, but you can do it in a way that isn't so painful for the drivers to have to go through. Now, if there's any taxi drivers watching, I would love it if you could comment on all of the things that you have to do in order to be a taxi driver, and tell us where you are, whether you're Colchester or if you're one of those drivers with Wolverhampton plates. Why? What specifically was it that got you to get those plates rather than Colchester plates? Because it's important the council know precisely what it is, although I suspect they do know. It's all of their paperwork. But leave your comments below so that they can read this and address it. And talking of leaving comments, if you haven't already, could you leave your comments on the master or disaster plan video I did, because I would like to do a follow-up video on that, reading out some of the most pertinent comments, because we've had some really cracking ones, and some others I definitely can't read out, but there's been some very constructive ones that I think the council do need to listen to, so I'd like to do a video highlighting those.